Yo, what's cracking? This your homeboy Ice Cube, and you tuned in to Everything Snowboarding and More podcast. You know what it is, baby.
Hey everybody, this is Mike with the Mountain Weekly News. Welcome back to episode number 50 of, we're actually going to change the name of the podcast now. It's going to stay pretty similar, the Everything Snowboarding Outdoors and More podcast. Thanks for tuning in. This week's episode is being sponsored by Quiet Cat. Quiet Cat is the manufacturers of some really badass all-terrain electric e-bikes, specifically built, some of them for hunting in the backcountry. These guys definitely know their stuff. I had a chance to test out the Ibex bike. We put the Rhino racks on the front. I had my bow. It was quite a blast. You'll see that full review coming up, but for more information, check out quietcat.com. This week's special guest is Sir Ranulph Fiennes. Sir Ranulph Fiennes and Matt Dyas. These two have put together a new movie called Explorer that just came out. Sir Ranulph Fiennes is probably the greatest explorer in the history of man, or at least that's what the Guinness Book of World Records says. And Matt went and put together kind of a roundup of all this footage of Sir Ranulph. He was like the first guy to cross all the poles, and I mean anything. He's so gnarly you've probably never even heard of him. So you're gonna enjoy this podcast. Just listen to the stories he talks about, cutting his fingers off and all sorts of gnarly stuff. So anyway, welcome back, episode number 50 of the Everything Snowboarding Outdoors and More podcast. Well, Sir Ranulph Fiennes and Matt Dyas, I hope everybody can go out and watch your new film, Explorer. Anybody that listens to this podcast will definitely like it. If you're an adventurer, an outdoor person, or just kind of want to learn a little bit about history, about, kind of what's been going on around the world, definitely check out this new movie called Explorer. It is coming out tomorrow, August 30th, but by the time you hear this, it will already be out. So again, thank you guys for coming onto the podcast.
Thanks. Oh, good. Yeah, good. Great.
You had admitted that you have Parkinson's disease, and I appreciate you being public about that. Could you tell us a little bit about your diagnosis and when and how the Parkinson's has affected whether it's your speech or your mobility? My mom has recently been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and so I know there's a lot of people out there, including Michael J. Fox. So if you could tell us a little bit about the Parkinson's that you're dealing with.
Yeah, well, the actor Michael J. Fox got Parkinson's like millions of other people. And you, Mike, could get it tomorrow. But, anyone can get it, basically. But he got it when he was only 29 years old. And he's still going strong at, 60 or whatever. So it's, not the end of the world, but it's a nuisance. And I find that it affects your balance. And very often you start wanting to fall backwards, which is very annoying. And also your shaking, it's very embarrassing having your hands shaking. At this moment, because I've only had it for 3 years or so, I can look at the guilty hand and say, stop shaking, like you do to a dog. And basically, if you think hard enough, it will stop shaking. But I've only had it for 3 years, sort of thing. And it can affect your memory, but then, my wife said my memory was always bad, so you can't put it down to Parkies. But they do say that if you swim in very cold water, your body will produce a protein which is good at anti-Parkinson, slowing it right down. And so that's what I'm intending to do, is to do a lot of cold water swimming.
Yeah, and you see that in the film too. There's a little bit of that in there. I'm sure you spotted that. But there's a sequence in the film where we talk about the cold water swimming. So that's in there as well.
Ran, thank you for your honesty. It seems like the cold water immersion and just cold water in general has lots of healing benefits these days. So really interesting to hear that that is something that you're using for your Parkinson's. You mentioned your late wife, Jenny. What does unconditional love mean to you, and how did Jenny play into that? If you could tell us a little bit about unconditional love and what that means to you.
Yeah, well, I got brought up in South Africa because my granny was South African, but when she died, Mum took all my sisters and me back to the UK, and I was 12 years old by then, and she settled somewhere in the UK, and there was a next door neighbour who had a daughter of 9. I was 12. And so we became teenage lovers, and basically I married her when she was 21, I was about 24. When I left the army, we together had no money because I'd left the army and she had left her mountain guide job in Scotland. So we sat down together and worked out that what we could do is that when I'd been in the British Army in Germany, facing up against the Soviet army, as you may remember, in the Scottish Tank Regiment, which my dad had commanded before he was killed in the war. And he was killed 6 months before I was born. But age 12, got to meet Jenny. I'm talking about my late wife of some 40 years. And basically, we decided we would make a living by doing what we've been doing in Germany at the time that we were sitting there waiting for the attack from the Warsaw Pact tanks. And whilst doing that, I had to keep the soldiers busy by canoeing and climbing in Europe. And in winter time, I taught them cross-country skiing to keep them busy, to stop them fighting each other in the canteen. And basically, Jenny said, well, when you're in the army doing that, why don't we do it as a husband and wife adventure? I explained that in the army, it was paid for by the taxpayer, which probably wouldn't help with the wife and husband doing it. And so she said, no, but the answer I have worked out, meaning my wife, Jenny, was what you do is you only go for the really big records, not just climbing a local mountain, but doing the first ever journey around planet Earth vertically, 52,000 miles without flying 1 meter in the entire journey, through both poles. And she sent me to a library like the Explorers Club. And I looked and I found that at the bottom of the world, there was a white bit called Antarctica, which had never been crossed by any human being by one route, not Shackleton, not Amundsen, nobody. So this did not look good. I looked at the top of the world and there was another white bit called the North Pole and the Arctic, which was even worse. So I went home and I told her it was a stupid idea. She became quite unpleasant. So I therefore I went back to the library. And we did decide we would do it. It took us 7 years of work, unpaid, sponsored by a regiment called the Special Air Service, and approved of eventually by the foreign offices of most places, but not America, not Canada, not New Zealand or South Africa. So we spent 7 years persuading them against governments that we should be made an exception of. And eventually, by trying hard enough, they got fed up and said yes. We also had 1,900 sponsor companies because we never paid for anything. Everything had to be sponsored. And we eventually got an icebreaker ship, 40 years old. And we set out from Greenwich on the Thames. And 3 years later, permanent travel without ever flying, we did the first journey around Earth, including crossing Antarctica before anybody else did. We became the first people to reach both poles the hard way. And so that expedition set us up for another 45 years of breaking world records of a geographical and physical nature. And that's what we go for. Choosing people is very difficult because you need people with really strong motivation, because they know they're going to get gangrene and other nasty things and skin cancer. So yeah, we're choosing on one expedition alone, we wanted 2 people. We had 800 applicants and we had to choose out of 800 just to get down to 2. And the main thing we're looking for is motivation being so strong that they will put up with the gangrene and the frostbite and everything else like that, day after day, month after month, in Antarctica and the Arctic and the Northwest Passage. Many, many expeditions, 32 expeditions, including in jungles and deserts and all over the place. That is basically in this film.
And I thought, just from my observations on Ginny and Love as well, I wanted it to be, there's obviously, I didn't want it to just be a film that had a list of expeditions. It needed to be a story for people who weren't just into exploring, so that was about love and friendship and loss, all of which, to get back to your question, was sort of that idea of unconditional love. I mean, the love was there and you can see it, but also Ginny in her own right was this extraordinary explorer. She got the first woman to win the polar medal, these extraordinary things that she could do, plus their relationship was so extraordinary and how close they were. And you see these amazing images that I've seen in the archive in the film as well, where they're together in Antarctica and they sort of take this domestic thing with them, this love, I guess, and they have candlelit dinners buried under the snow somewhere in Antarctica. It's sort of amazing how that plays out. But so the unconditional love is there. Sometimes it's very professional, and what I saw in the footage, but other times it's very tender and loving and close.
I know that there was a time when you had to cut your fingertips off, and she helped you, not only helped you, but brought you cups of tea while you were doing that process. So if you could tell us a little bit about what that means to you.
One hand in the Arctic in the dark by myself on a solo expedition towards the North Pole, And one night, the ice broke up under my feet at -48. And I ended up with one hand that half fingers or 5 fingers were frozen stiff. Somehow I got back to an uninhabited island on the edge of the Arctic and eventually got a message through to the lady who was doing our communications. Now, because the Norwegians are our enemy and rivals, they listen in to our planning. So this lady we'd chosen was from the Orkney Islands, like Scotland and North, and her language is so difficult that only we could understand her accent. And the message came, I got a message through saying that one of my hands had completely gone, I have to have amputations and so on. And she got the message back to my wife, who by that time had not come on the polar expedition that particular time. She was a farmer of cattle. And she said, well, typical of Ran, you know, we're already short-handed on the farm, and now he's, you know, lost one of his main hands. So basically that was a problem. The people back in the UK refused to amputate the hand for 5 months after the trauma to give the unfrozen bit a chance to recover, because it's going to be made into the new ends of the new short fingers on one hand. I get back to the UK and I find a doctor who's prepared to do it after 5 months. And you're waiting for 5 months, moving around. Can you imagine one of your hands got 2 or 3 inches of dead finger, black, frozen, mummified flesh on the end of 5 fingers and your thumb and so on. Every time you touch something, like at night, you can't not touch something. You scream, literally. It's very, very painful. The nerves at the end of each finger. And by the time 3 months had gone by, Jenny was saying that I was getting very impatient and irritable, and that we ought to cut them off ourselves, not wait another 3 months. And so we decided to get a Black & Decker workbench and a fret saw, and she bought me cups of tea, and the thumb took 2 months to saw through, not 2 months, 2 days. And yeah, so the physiologist, eventually, the lady said I'd done a good job. And that was 3 months before he would have done it. The surgeon actually, I think, didn't like it, got jealous.
Well, I bet the surgeon was pissed. What kind of medical training have you had over the years, or how important was it to make sure that you surrounded yourself with a team that was pretty darn competent in any type of medical emergency that's going to happen, because you are so much self-supported?
I think you're saying about the medical side of it. Well, out of the 2 people that we chose out of 800 people, when we chose them, we realized that they weren't doctors. We weren't doctors either. We would be on a 3-year expedition. We'd be locked down in the middle of Antarctica in the darkness for 8 months. If we managed to cross Antarctica and got up the other side of the world through the Northwest Passage and then cross the entire Arctic Ocean, again, we would have to have, a doctor. So one of the 2 that we chose got trained by the British Army to take teeth out and that sort of stuff. Actually, when we got down to Antarctica, our teeth got very bad indeed, but it wouldn't go anywhere near him. And then he was trained also to take our appendix out, because in Antarctica, the nearest doctor was 800 miles away, and he couldn't possibly, they were Russians. And when we got down to Antarctica, even though he had been trained at removing appendix, he'd by then forgotten which side they were on.
I had heard that you were actually afraid of spiders. You have an arachnophobia, a fear of spiders. So how did that come about? How did you manage to get over that? And with forced concentration, is that something that anybody can overcome, any sort of obstacle that is a mental barrier that they're having?
Yeah, in South Africa, when I was about 11, a spider jumped off my mum's bedroom curtains down my back in the pajamas and bit me on the back. And after that, I was frightened, even when we came to the UK, of stupid little English spiders I was frightened of. In Arabia, when I went out there to fight for the Arab army, they were all over the place, 11-inch camel spiders crawling out of a sleeping bag. After 2 months of that, they never bit you. I lost my phobia. But I had another phobia, which was vertigo, and I tried to lose it by climbing Everest. I failed. And then by the time I was an old age pensioner, over 65, I became the first old age pensioner to climb Everest, sort of thing. And by that time, I still hadn't lost my phobia. So the guide after Everest said, look, there's a place where you really will lose your phobia. It's not right out in the Himalayas, Everest. It's in Europe. It's cheap to get to, and I would make sure you lose your vertigo on a 6,000-foot sheer mountain called the Eiger, north face of the Eiger. The Germans call it the murder wall. And gradually, over 4 months a year for 5 years of training, I gradually learned slowly to lose the great fear of vertigo. And eventually we climbed the north face of the Eiger. And so that eventually enabled me to switch from horizontal polar stuff, if I wish to vertical mountain stuff. And we, over the various expeditions, have raised £19.8 million, which we give towards cancer and heart condition training for nurses. And we've also got scientific work done all over the place. And my wife became the first woman in Britain to be awarded by the Queen the Polar Medal, became the first woman in the all-male Antarctic Club, accepted and voted for. And about 8 months ago from today, the Foreign Office in the UK has named a huge new Antarctic mountain after the work that Ginny did in the Arctic and the Antarctica on these expeditions into the ionospherics.
Well, let's go ahead and end the interview with this question. It's kind of a heavy one. Have you been able to find peace in life? And if so, how have you been able to find peace in life?
Peace in life. I don't think I could say that. I still have sort of, like most people, particularly now, normal financial worries. Can I make enough money through lecturing about the past, writing books and so on? I've written 25 of them. I've got to keep doing that to make enough income for us to, live reasonably, and my lovely wife and daughter of 16, and make sure she can get what she wants to do, which is to be a zoologist. And yeah, so I wouldn't call that exactly peace in life. You're still worried.
You had mentioned you had 19,000 sponsors involved on one of your treks. I believe it was the Antarctica, the first trip. How much time did that involve of actually taking the photos for the sponsors? And, did that extend the length of your expeditions? And in theory, if you didn't have those sponsors and you were just out there doing it, could some of these journeys be done in a quicker amount of time?
And I'll just say that I saw before maybe I saw in the way that Ran and Ginny conceived all these expeditions, there was a really interesting shift. You can draw a line from Ran sort of back to the great explorers, it's connected to that Britishness and all of that stuff. But you can also draw a line forward, and they were at this turning point, I think, where they realized that there was no good if they didn't have sponsors and didn't take photographs and didn't film it. So it's really interesting from a filmmaking point of view that you see that kind of starting to emerge, actually, the value of recording things, of taking records, of getting your sponsors on board. So I think, certainly from my point of view, looking at the archive, I saw sponsorship really important. Right?
Yeah, 1,900 sponsors for that one expedition, and it took 7 years on the telephone begging for stuff and getting it. And we worked out that if you paid for it by getting big coverage, PR coverage, then they would be getting their pound of flesh sponsors. And we had a rule that we would never pay anybody for anything at any time.
Well, Sir Ranulph Fiennes and Matt Dyas, I hope everybody can go out and watch your new film, Explorer. Anybody that listens to this podcast will definitely like it. If you're an adventurer, an outdoor person, or just kind of want to learn a little bit about history, about, kind of what's been going on around the world, definitely check out this new movie called Explorer. It is coming out tomorrow, August 30th, but by the time you hear this, it will already be out. So again, thank you guys for coming on to the show, and I wish you both the best of luck.
Thanks. All right. Take care.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye.
All right. Well, that was such a fun interview. I mean, if that doesn't inspire you to get outside and just to go explore and do all sorts of cool stuff, I really don't know what will. So anyway, thank you to Sir Ranulph Fiennes and Matt Dyas for coming on and talking about Explorer, their new movie, and just kind of what it's like to be, a badass out there. Once again, this week's episode is being sponsored by Quiet Cat. Quiet Cat, all-terrain, big tire, fat tire e-bikes. Really, really cool for getting out in the backcountry. And honestly, you could ride these things everywhere. So if you need something for around town and something to go hunt with, definitely check these out. They're going to be really, really hot this fall. And once again, we changed the name of the podcast, so thanks for tuning in. It's episode number 50 of the Everything Snowboarding, Outdoors, and More podcast.